Let's pray as we begin. Our Father, we appreciate the privilege of studying Thy Word. We ask for Thy presence as we do so. Guide our minds to the presence of the Holy Spirit, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Well? No, we're not going on to 2 Peter, we're not going on to James. I know, I did. We'll have to do it in the afternoon meetings. No, we're going to have to stay with the plan. Study Song of Solomon. Because this is an Old Testament book. Well, I admit, if I had chosen Old Testament books, this would not have been it. But that's all right. It's there for a reason. When we study any part of the Scripture, what is our first task? What do we want to know first? Who was the author? Okay, what? To whom he was writing. That'll be even more fun. And authorship, intended audience. What's next? Circumstances, including, of course, date. Yeah. Well, in this case, we're going to say, who is the implied author? Who's the implied author? Solomon is the implied author. Well, at least Solomon seems to be speaking about half the time. Who's the other apparent? Though there are no direct quotations within the text, we deduce from studying the text that there's a second author, implied author. Who's that? Who's the other half of the text written by? No, you're you're far afield. The maiden. Well, what's her name? Have I thrown you a curve? Is there... yeah. Well, she's the Shulamite. Huh?
I knew that.
But that's a feminine form. And it's really a literary device. What's Shulamite really? Well, think about it. Who's the implied author again? Solomon. So say it again. Solomon, Shulamite. Shlomo, Shlomi.
Oh, that's the queen of Jerusalem.
Well, if Solomon is the male figure, who's the female figure? Well, it isn't even one of his wives. It's a literary creation. Shlomo is the male figure and Shlomi is the female figure. It's Solomon in the masculine form and Solomon in the feminine form. Got it? It's just the feminine form of the name Solomon. You think this has anything to do with the meaning of the book? There are two characters here. They both have the same name. One is a man, the other's a woman. Okay? In the book, there's two characters. Mr. Solomon and Mrs. Solomon. All right. Well, one is the male figure and the other is the female figure. And they're counterparts to each other. They're intended to be counterparts to each other. Well, what does the opening verse say of the song? We know we're dealing in wisdom literature, and we looked at great length at the nature of wisdom literature when we studied Proverbs. We're going to have to do some of that again. How does the opening verse read here? There's a superscription. The superscription is important in establishing something about the book. What do we have here? The Song of Songs. All right. And how is such a phrase used in Hebrew? Oh, I know that it's quoted in the New Testament, but the New Testament is just quoting the Hebrew usage. How is a phrase like this used in Hebrew?
Sort of emphatic, isn't it? Like this is the greatest, like Holy of Holies.
The Holy of Holies is the pinnacle of holiness. Yes. Can you think of some others? The Holy of Holies is an easy one. What's some others? This is common Semitic talk. What are some others? He said Holy of Holies. Come on. Somebody else. King of Kings, Lord of Lords, God of Gods. Okay. Yes. A mighty man of might, meaning he was the strongest. Yes. So we have these phrases meaning the pinnacle, the very essence, the very best. So, Song of Songs is what then? The very, among songs, this is the very best. This is the song of all songs. This is the essential song, if you want to sing a song. Shir means simply to sing, and song has the same implication and semantic range in Hebrew that it has in English. It's something you sing. It's not particularly, it makes no distinction between sacred and profane. It's a song, the best song. Okay? The other part of the verse. What? Which is Solomon's. Yeah. What is it? What do you see in the text?
Asher the Shalom. It's like,
A share. The presence of a share tells you it's not poetry. The Asher conjunction in the superscription tells you that this is a prose heading to the book. This is not part of the song. L'shloma, what does that imply? The l plus the hey ending. It shows ownership? Yes. Yes. And the hey ending is directive originally. So what does that indicate? What? We have here the same situation that we had with the Psalms of David, or the City of David, or a lot of other things. City of David means what? Yeah. City of David means what? What? It was the city he owned. Well, where is Jerusalem? Isn't it in the tribe of Judah? Didn't the Judeans own it? No.
Like the Belgian Congo, which is the
Well,
property of the king.
it wasn't even in Judah anyway. Where was Jerusalem? It was on the border. It was one of the border sites between Judah and Benjamin. When we read in Joshua, we're going to find that when you follow the border list, the city of Jerusalem, Jebus, is one of the sites. It's on the border between the two tribes, and I suppose that's why, since the Jebusites were peaceful and cooperative, I suppose that's why they never got conquered. They were the border town between Judah and Benjamin. Any attempt to conquer it would have created what? Trouble between Judah and Benjamin. So, because the Jebusites were cooperative with the Hebrews, because there'd never been any real trouble, because they were the border town between Judah and Benjamin, nobody had ever conquered them. So David decided that that would be the place for the new capital, considerably north of Hebron, closer to his kingdom of Israel, of which he had become king. So he didn't send the tribal militias to Jebus. He did not send the tribal militias. It's important. If he had sent the tribal militias, who would have owned it? The tribes. Who did he send? His own personal army. You see, David did something that was forbidden by the law. He raised his own army. That's forbidden. But he did it. And he sent his army to conquer Jebus, Jerusalem. And you remember the story. He said to his troops, whoever can get up the water shaft and into the city and conquer it will become the new commander of my army. He said this to get rid of his cousin Joab, who by this time had become too powerful and a great embarrassment to David. And what happened? Who got up the water shaft first? Joab made sure that he got up first. And you remember they asked Margaret Thatcher before she resigned, who comes after you? You know what she said? After me comes me. Meaning, if she wanted to run again, what? She'd be it. And so after Joab came Joab. David was stuck with him. And it became, he called it from that day, the city of David. And the city of David meant he and his family owned it. It was theirs. It wasn't any of the tribes. It was his own royal citadel. And the kings of Judah got a lot of money from Jerusalem over the years, because people who lived there paid their tax directly to the king, who was their personal governor. He became not only the king over two countries, Israel and Judah, but he became the king of a city-state. Right? Now, of course, he wanted to be king of that city-state, didn't he? Because back in patriarchal times, there had been a reference to, remember this? In Genesis? Genesis 14, the battle with the 5 kings. After Lot was taken captive, right? And Abraham had to go get him with his retainers, and he battled the 5 kings of Mesopotamia and won. What did he do? He came back and paid tithe to Melchizedek, who was the king of Jerusalem. Now you see, David was doing something deliberate here. If Melchizedek, the king of Jerusalem, was a person that Abraham paid tithes to, what would you say of their relative position? Why was he above? Why was Melchizedek above Abraham? To pay the tithe. Why did he acknowledge him as a leader? He was a priest. Yeah. A priest king. Yes, over the city of Jerusalem. But that's the point. What was Abraham's social position? Though he was very powerful, very wealthy, very influential, an Amorite prince, because the word prince is used of him several times, nevertheless, what was his social position? He was a what? No, he wasn't a foreigner. As a ger, he was a resident alien from the Amorite invasion wave. But what was his lifestyle? What was he? He was a Bedouin. He was a Bedouin chief. And Melchizedek was what? One of their kings. And by definition under Amorite law, what? By definition, under the law, the king of a city-state is what? Is above a Bedouin prince. Okay? So, when King David settled in his mind that he had to have a new capital, when after 7 years the elders of Israel, the northern kingdom, decided that it was time to leave the house of Saul, and voted David, and that's how kings were done, voted David king of Israel in the assembly. David knew that he had to have a capital that was neutral in between the two countries. Had there been any rivalry between Israel and Judah prior to this? Had there been any rivalry between Israel and Judah prior to this? There had been centuries of rivalry. Among God's own people? Rivalry among God's own people? The answer is what? Oh, definitely. There was sectional strife between the north and the south. David knew this, and he saw a wonderful opportunity in that this unconquered city was the very city of Melchizedek. By taking it and making himself the king of that city-state, he inherited the position of Melchizedek, which therefore placed him in what role vis-a-vis Father Abraham? It made him what? It made him of higher rank and placed him automatically over all Israel. So the city of David became a crux. Understand? And all of this story was about what word? Of. Yes. This whole story was about of in Song of Solomon 1:1. We're doing an exegesis of the text and we've gotten to the of. Now, we find similarly the Psalms of David. And what do we discover? Yes, a couple of them were even, what? Written by David. A couple of them were even written by David. And I'm driving it home because religious tradition would say what? He wrote all of them, including the ones about the Babylonian exile. Yes. Well, you've asked a very highly debated question. Half a dozen? This is still a bitterly fought over. The poetry, there's none of the marks of early Hebrew poetry in except 2 Psalms, for sure. But that doesn't mean that they couldn't have been updated. So you can't be sure just because it has the marks of late poetry. You can't be sure that a poem written that sounds like it was written in the 20th century just isn't a modern version of Emily Dickinson. You understand? So, yes. David, why did David start this psalm collection anyway? The historical books tell us flatly why he started this psalm collection. What worship services? At the temple. Now see, now you've done it. How many Christians did Nero burn in the Colosseum? What's the answer? None. Why? There wasn't any Colosseum. That's right. My point is, he said David started this collection of psalms for their worship service. I said, where? He said, in the temple. What's the problem? There wasn't any temple. But you were on the right track. If there wasn't any temple, was there anything? A plan for a temple, yeah, but that's not... What? There were various shrines all over the place, say you. How does that help explain our psalm collection? Well, of course, by David's time, the temples, the various places like Shiloh and Shechem and Bethel and Hebron and Ramah and Gilgal. Let's see, can I keep this going? Dan. Not Samaria yet. Gibeah and others had long traditions. They'd been sacred places and temple sites for 300 years, right? And longer. 400 years. So they had their own traditions. And of course there was considerable movement around with which one had the real ark and so forth. What did David do about this problem? He centralized the monarchy. He went and got his very own personal capital. He made himself the successor to Melchizedek. He what? What did he do about this problem of high places hither and yon? Well, you say he destroyed them. The Deuteronomist would wish that you were right. The Deuteronomist would say, that's the only thing he didn't do, he should have done. In fact, that's what the Deuteronomist does say. No, he didn't destroy them. It was way too soon for that. He had high priests. Yeah. He did something rather dramatic that he had no right to do. Why was David doing all these things he had no right to do? Where were the judges and the tribal elders while David was busy doing all these innovations that he had no right to do? There was a problem. Do you remember what the problem was? What was the problem? They had a big general problem. They'd had this problem for a while. In fact, they'd had it for more than 100 years. And what was the problem? The Phoenicians from Crete had come over and settled on the coastal plain. Fine. And they built some cities on the coastal plain. And as they grew, they pushed inland. And they came to the foothills. And the Hebrews, who lived in the mountain ridge, had grown. And as they grew, they what? They gradually settled down. And finally, they came in contact. And what? And there was trouble. What kind of trouble? Warfare. The Phoenicians had the better of the deal. As the carriers of culture in the ancient world, they had all the good stuff. They had spears, had iron chain mail and iron and bronze shields and iron helmets. And the Hebrews, being the carriers of no particular culture, had what? Yes, slings. Yes. They didn't have any of these metal products because they didn't have any makers of metal. The Hebrews had two things. They had faith in their God, and as time passed, they had more people. Okay. So there ensued 100 years' war. And how did the Hebrews do during this 100-year war? No, not well at all. And at the end of 100 years of losing, what did they say? We need a king. What we really need is a military leader. We need a king who can organize us militarily. And those who were really, really anxious to win over the Philistines said, yes, give us a king. And those who were worried about the old tribal league and the law and the covenant with Yahweh said what? Said what? The conservatives said what? Absolutely no king. And so it took a long time before there came to be a king. Right? And how did their king do? How did he do? Well, he saved the men of Jabesh Gilead from having their eye plucked out, which is, I'd be grateful if I'd lived there. He did in Nahash the Ammonite as his first act. That was good. That bode well. Well, you see, there was the problem. He did well against the Ammonites. And he did well against a number of local tribes who had been problems for the Hebrews. But when it came to the Philistines, what? These early successes made him rely on his military. And as he relied on his military, he kept violating covenant law. And the judge who was in office in those days warned him again and again. And finally it came down to the real showdown. They knew that eventually they were going to have to do what? They were going to have a showdown battle with, they knew they would have to have a showdown battle with whom? The Philistines. And what happened? After decades of warfare, how did Saul's showdown turn out? No, that wasn't the showdown. That was an opening skirmish. In the end, Saul and his house were defeated and killed. And their bodies ended up on the wall of Bethshan, one of the Philistine strongholds in the northern Jordan Valley. It was a resounding, dramatic defeat. All right? It was a dramatic defeat. The first attempt at monarchy was to solve the Philistine problem, and in fact, how did they end up? Worse than when they started.
Saul must have been successful against some of the nations, and he had this big army that he
Why did they put Saul's armor on David? Because what? It was the only armor they had. And Saul was probably the only person big enough to wear it because it was probably made for a Philistine. Now then, according to the Bible, the same judge Samuel had anointed David to be king. And he made moves to become king. And there were many of the tribal leaders who said, oh no. They had a slogan, anybody but David. Why were there so many folks who felt another king maybe? We might be willing to try a king again. As long as what? As long as it isn't David. Why were there so many people who felt negative about David? Why was there this strong feeling against him as king?
He was living with the Philistines for a while, or just because he was from Judah?
Well, you said because he was living with the Philistines for a while, or because he was from Judah? Yes? He was a Judean. The Northern League centered in Shechem would not even consider a Judean. Much less a Judean who what? Had been a client king of the Philistines. There were even rumors that at the last great battle that the Philistine overlord Achish had who there with him at his side as Saul and his sons were mowed down, and the militia of Israel. There were rumors that David had been there fighting on the enemy's side. Of course, David said no such thing, that he had feigned madness and gone back and hadn't been there at all. Did people like that any better? No. No. Okay. That's why it took so long for them to come around to David. Why did it take them 7 years? It took that long to even consider it. And why did they finally accept David as king? Well, I know why the northern kingdom did. Why? How well were Saul's successors prepared to fight the battle against the Philistines? All the able men of the house of Saul had been killed. There was a half-witted son that they'd left at home, and a lame grandchild, and so forth. So, really the only thing they had going for them was that the commander of the army of Israel was a wise man with great military experience, and he might have saved the house of Saul, but unfortunately, what happened to him? He was assassinated in time of peace by David's cousin Joab, right? And what did people say then when David's cousin committed the murder of the commander of the army of Israel without provocation in time of peace? Everybody knew that he was the real man holding up the throne of Israel, and now he'd been killed. And what did people assume? David must have ordered it. Right? It was logical to presume. It's his own cousin did the killing. Now Joab killed him because he didn't like a rival. He figured that someday Israel and Judah would be united. He wanted to make sure he didn't have a rival for commander of the army. Then what? Then there was this king, Ishbaal. And what happened to him? Then he was assassinated. And some men, believing David was behind all this, brought his head to David. Expecting what? Expecting a reward. And this is just the sort of thing that David didn't want. Here was the head of Saul's son, the king, being brought to him. And why did these guys bring the head to David? Because they thought what? David is the guy who's been manipulating all this. This is what he wants. Finally, we've gotten rid of the king of Israel. the very thing David didn't want happened. And there they were with the head. So what did he do? He took their heads off and said, I had nothing to do with this. I am innocent of this blood. And what did a lot of people say? Yes, it's a cover-up. He says he's innocent of it. He's the one who's behind all this. He probably killed these guys. It's actually mentioned in Scripture. He probably killed these guys so that they wouldn't be able to tell that he was behind it. David started out with some real negatives to overcome in people's minds. Okay? Now then, how were things going with the Philistines? Since clearly the kings of Israel were falling apart, how were things going with the Philistines? They weren't going well at all. And the southern kingdom of Judah had to face this problem. So David made a deal with the Philistines. I won't encroach on your territory if you'll just stop encroaching on mine. And the people of Judah said, good, good. Finally, we don't have marauding bands of Philistines coming to attack our outlying farms. Good. But the people of Israel, by far the greater number of God's people, said what? Look, this fellow what? This fellow, this Judean king, he what? He makes deals with his old friends, the Philistines. But after 7 years, what did they have to say? Things are going pretty well in Judah. Things are running in an orderly fashion. They don't have the Philistines invading them. But Israel was still being beaten up. Marauders. There was still a state of war. Nobody knew for sure who the successor of Saul was. Things were declining rapidly. And finally the elders of Israel came to David at Hebron and said what? Would you consider... You think maybe David had considered it? Would you consider the possibility of being the king of Israel too? And David said what? Well, I'll have to think about it and ask the Lord about it. Give me some time to think it over. And having thought about it for 30 seconds, what did he say? Now he knew he couldn't stay king in Hebron, the capital of Judah. And that's when he took Jerusalem. And all of a sudden, the Philistine overlords discovered what? That their friend that they had been supplying weapons to for all these years was now not only the king of Judah, this little country they'd made a deal with, but what? He had also become the king of Israel. Now he had their weapons makers and their weaponry and a standing army modeled after theirs. And one day Achish, king of Gath, woke up and said, what? I have a problem. I have a very severe problem. So he immediately sent his army upon David's announcement that he was king over Israel. He immediately sent his army up into the mountains to cut off Israel from Judah. He knew what was going to happen. But of course, David had known that too. David had known that the time would come when the elders of Israel would come to him and ask what? Will you become king over Israel? He gathered the tribal militias, and he also gathered his own army, modeled after the Philistine army. And what happened? In a succession of battles that David had obviously prepared for, what happened? The Philistines were beaten every time in a whole succession of battles rapidly. After 100 years of trouble, David made another deal with Achish. And what was that? David said to him, now I've been your faithful vassal all these years, and we've had a good relationship. Now you've made war on me. You've lost. What? Because you were good to me in the past, I won't kill you. What? Now is your chance to be my faithful vassal. And what happened to the picked troops, the personal army of Achish? The personal army. The Cherethites and the Pelethites. They became David's bodyguard, and he brought them to Jerusalem. Well, the lords of the Philistines had to obey because their army was where? Well, why didn't the army say, no, we're Philistines. We're not going to serve the Hebrew king. Yes, that's right. They owed their lives to him. And secondly, he had the money to pay them well. Okay? And so the Philistine problem was over almost at the beginning of David's reign. David had a new capital. David had a personal army that belonged to David, a capital that belonged to David. And now he did something. And what he did is described in 2 Samuel 6. Second Samuel 5 is an interesting chapter. It opens with the description of David becoming the king of Israel. In verse 6, it tells the story of the capture of Jerusalem. Beginning at verse 17, it describes David's sudden conquest of the Philistines. The story I've just been telling is in 2 Samuel 5. All right? In rapid succession, 2 Samuel 5 tells the story that I've just told. Then, in 2 Samuel 6, immediately thereafter, David does something. David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. Now he'd conquered the Philistines, and he called out the tribal militias again. What did the people have to assume? When the king calls up the tribal militias, what do you have to assume? There's a great national emergency, a great war that has to be fought. Why did he gather the armies of Israel? And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal of Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of Yahweh of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God upon a new cart, and brought it into the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house of Israel were making merry before Yahweh with all their might, with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. Yeah, there's a reference to songs right there. The ark had been wandering, remember? It had wandered from Shiloh. The Philistines had captured it, had gone to the various Philistine cities. It had come back and had been in this man's house for some time. Why did David take care to make sure that the armies of Israel were with him? Because this move of the ark into Jerusalem was a new and unprecedented move. Where was the ark supposed to be? Where was the ark supposed to be? I will say that if you are conservative of bent of mind, and you know if you are, if you had lived early in David's reign, you would have been very, very unhappy. Now look, what was David's purpose in having the armies of Israel with him to bring the ark into Jerusalem? So the northern kingdom wouldn't feel that this move... Where had the ark been? Where had the ark always been? Shechem, you say. Shiloh, he says. Is there another guess? Huh? Well, we've got Shechem and Shiloh. Yes, it had been destroyed, but I said where had it been? One said Shechem, another said Shiloh, and I would have said it came first where? To Bethel. Well, it had been at Bethel. It had been at Shechem. It had been at Shiloh. Where are all these places? Where are they all? They're all in Israel, the northern kingdom. And now the thing had come back from Philistia into a place in Judah. And the king was bringing it to his own capital. Was there any precedent for such a move? None. Who said the king could take the ark to his capital? The king said. So he wanted the armies of Israel to escort it. But they'd begun treating the ark, you know, in the last 20, 30 years like an idol. And the Philistines had set it back on a cart, the way you'd move an idol. That was the appropriate thing to do for the Philistines. When they did it, it was good. When the Hebrews did it, what? Why? The priests were supposed to carry it on their shoulders. Treating it this way was treating it like what? Like it was another idol. They were acting as if they believed the way the Philistines did. And the two guys from the house where it was put, the two sons, were walking along behind it. What were these two sons acting as? Catch this now. I'm answering the question that always comes up. Everybody asks this question. Why did God do that to poor Uzzah? We're getting the answer right now. How were these two brothers acting? What position had they assumed? What role were they taking? They were acting as priests of the ark. And they were acting in the pagan manner. Now, if David brought the ark into Jerusalem under these circumstances, there would have been a grave danger spiritually. And what would it have been? I can see it very clearly. Yes, David's removal of the ark to Jerusalem would have been the installation of some sort of idol into the new capital, and they were in grave danger of starting off their new kingdom as a kind of semi-pagan kingdom. Get it? Now something happened. They got there, and the oxen stumbled, it says. And the ark looked like it was going to fall off. Uzzah grabbed it, and what? Yes. And so David had to put off bringing the ark into Jerusalem. Okay? Now, how is this the beginning of the Song of Songs? All of this is, why did we get songs in Jerusalem? Where did they come from? Okay, we'll see you next week.
Good morning and happy Sabbath. We'd like to start out with our opening song, number 537 in your hymnal, He Leadeth Me.
Let's bow our head for prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this morning, for the opportunity you give us to come and worship you. Thank you for this time. And also thank you because we know that at this moment we're not praying to an open space, to an empty space. We're praying, we're talking to somebody who cares. Someone who is always with us, someone who is able to empower us to be what you want us to be. Thank you for this morning. Thank you for this beautiful Sabbath day. And help us this day, Lord, to open our hearts, to feel that you're always with us, to feel that your word is doing something in our hearts, that whatever we hear in this place, may it be for the best for our lives, and so that we might be able to help a lot of people that don't know you. Thank you one more time, and be always with us, please. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning and happy Sabbath to each one of you. We welcome the visitors. This morning we are going to have a special feature. It just so happens that the young man who is going to do it is going to be coming through the door in a couple of seconds. I see him coming through the doors. In the meantime, let us repeat the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Today our special feature is going to be given to us by John Schumacher.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry I was late. I was trying to help her find a pianist over next door, and I'm afraid I couldn't find one, so. October. O hushed October morning mild, thy leaves have ripened to the fall. Tomorrow's wind, if it be wild, should waste them all. The crows above the forest call. Tomorrow they may form and go. O hushed October morning mild, begins the hour of this day slow. Make the day seem to us less brief, hearts not averse to being beguiled. Beguile us in the way you know. Release one leaf at break of day, at noon release another leaf. One from our trees, one far away. Retard the sun with gentle mist, enchant the land with amethyst. Slow, slow, for the grape's sake, if they were all, whose leaves already are burnt with frost, whose clustered fruit must else be lost, for the grape's sake along the wall. Good morning and welcome to the first Sabbath school of the month of October. I'm wondering this morning, are there any members here, visitors, who have never been to the New England area in the fall? Do we have anyone here for the very first time? I see some hands high up in the balcony. Are there any other hands here? Someone here who's never been to New England in the fall? Okay, well I guess I'm going to be speaking in a few minutes to the young ladies up in the balcony. Fall in New England is a very, very beautiful event. There are few places in the world where the nature and the trees and the leaves turn out just the way they do here, with all their color and all their glory. Here in New England we are host to a variety of activities. Squirrels gathering acorns, leaves falling from the trees with bright colors, pumpkins ripening on the vines. Later in the month of October, you know, there will be a lot of candy swapped and costumes displayed. We have a lot of activity on the farms. We have people gathering things in, preparing for the winter. But our New England fall is not as unique as some may think. Many things of our fall here in New England reflect the same falls and the same changes of the seasons that Christ knew and the disciples in his day, in the times of the Bible. Although it wasn't quite as severe as our winter here, they too had a season of colder weather. If you were to take the King James Version of the Bible and go through from Genesis to Revelation, you would find 60 different references to the harvest time. The word fall and the word autumn are not found in the King James Version, but the word harvest refers to that season and that period of time. 47 times in the Old Testament the word harvest is found, and 13 in the New Testament, both being verb and noun forms of harvest. In Genesis 8 verse 22 we find the first reference to the harvest, and of course the last reference to the harvest is found in Revelation 14 verse 15, in reference to the end of the world and the judgment period. Particular to the time of harvest was the Feast of Harvest, the Feast of Ingathering and Tabernacles, which was a very profound time of rejoicing and thanksgiving. Thankful for what the Lord has given to the people during the summer, thankful for the blessings of the rain and the sunshine for their fruit and their crops, particularly the crops of the wheat and the olives and the grapes. It was also a time of preparation for the winter to come, a time of storing up and gathering in. Here in New England, I want to take you back 150 years. 150 years ago, at this very time in New England, in this very area, people, farmers, predominantly farmers, were thinking about their fall harvest and thinking about the winters to come. In the middle of their harvesting time, when they had gotten their fruits together, their apples, their pumpkins, their pears, their grapes, and their vegetables, they took time out at the end of the season before the hard winter came to listen to a very peculiar man by the name of William Miller, who was also a farmer, who happened to have been born only about 2 hours from here in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. This gentleman was a farmer by trade who had turned preacher overnight by a series of remarkable events. He believed that it would not be very much longer, back in the summer and the fall of 1842, that the Lord would appear, when Jesus Christ would return a second time. I'm sure many of you have heard this before. Not too far from here in Marlborough, there was a family by the name of Priest. Lewis Priest and his family accepted this message of William Miller, and they converted to the Millerite movement. In October of 1844, they too, like many others, decided that they were not going to harvest their crops that year. Why? Because they knew from the study of their Bible that on October 22nd of that year, Jesus would return. So they believed. So they left their crops in the ground, and they went about their business spreading the message of Jesus' soon return. The day came and went, and of course Jesus did not return. They were very bitterly disappointed, but they, the Priest family, like many others, decided to return to the study of the Bible and to determine where they had erred in their interpretation. A few years later, they moved here to Lancaster, Massachusetts, and they bought a little farm up in the northern section of town on what is now known as Lunenburg Road. These followers soon found another family in town by the name of Rice, who also believed in Jesus' soon return. And it was around the summer of 1846 that some of these folks accepted the message of the Sabbath truth, as they had heard it from fellow Millerites up in Washington, New Hampshire, and Elder Bates down in New Bedford. These people assembled themselves together in April of 1864 at the home of the Priest family, and they formed, with the help of Elder J. N. Luffenborough and the new arrival assistance of Elder and Mrs. S. N. Haskell, what was known as the very first Seventh-day Adventist church here in Lancaster, Massachusetts. Now these faithful few moved their activities from the north end of town down here to the south end of town, in what is known as South Lancaster, also called New Boston. In South Lancaster, they quickly assembled themselves together in the home of Elder Haskell, where they met regularly every week on the Sabbath day. In 1869, they formed the Vigilant Missionary Society, and in 1873, they formed their permanent structure, which had been a carriage and wagon shop over on Sawyer Street in Narrow Lane, and they formed that building into an official church. And that today is where the village church stands, having been added on to numerous times. That contains the original building of the first official meeting house of the Seventh-day Adventist Church here in Lancaster. Fall continued to be a very important theme for these people as they studied the seasons of prophecy and the events related to the Feast of the Tabernacles and the Day of Atonement. They were led to realize that Jesus was not to return on earth on October 22nd of 1844, but rather he began his second phase of a special ministry in the heavenly sanctuary. With an emphasis on this theme and the theme of the Sabbath day, they went forward in faith in 1882 and established a school here in South Lancaster. It was called, in fact, the New England School, later the South Lancaster Academy. And it grew and flourished with the blessing of the Lord until it became the Lancaster Junior College around the time of World War I, and then later the Atlantic Union College, as it is known today. If you had asked these people 150 years ago if they thought we would be here today, I'm sure their answer would be a resounding no. But I'm sure in the same breath they would say if they were here today, and if time were delayed as it was, they again would return to the themes of the fall, and they would encourage us to look forward to the great harvest that is spoken of in the Bible in many places. The harvest of the earth, the harvest of Jesus' second coming, when the true first fruits have ripened and the message that they began back 150 years ago reached its full effect and caused the ripening of the earth to increase to the extent of Jesus' soon return. Ellen White mentions fall also quite frequently in her writings. She tells us that we are to spread the truth of Jesus' soon return, the truth of the state of the dead and the Sabbath, the truth of his work in the heavenly sanctuary on our behalf. We are to spread these truths like the leaves of autumn. And as you can see outside, there are many leaves out there in autumn, and there are many different directions the wind scatters them about. And so too our message has been scattered through the entire world. And here in Lancaster, our very first missionary left in 1874, Elder John Nevins Andrews. So you can see Atlantic Union College has a lot to do with the harvest time and the harvest of the earth. Atlantic Union College helped begin the work that is going to progress to that great harvest day. And you and I are invited to participate in that. You and I are given the privilege of helping assist in the harvesting and the gathering in of those who would be saved through Jesus Christ. In the Bible, if you would turn to Psalms chapter 67, you will find a very short psalm there, a very short psalm that is a psalm from the days of the Feast of the Tabernacle and the Feast of the Harvest. It was a song that was sung quite often this time of year by the children of Israel. I'd like to read it to you briefly so you can have an idea of some of the activities of the people at that time, and you can be reminded through the words of this verse what the fall season is all about. Psalms chapter 67. God be merciful unto us, and bless us, and cause his face to shine upon us, that thy way may be known upon the earth, thy saving health among the nations. Let the people praise thee, O God. Let all the people praise thee. O let the nations be glad and sing for joy, for thou shalt judge the people righteously, and govern the nations upon the earth. Let the people praise thee, O God. Let all the people praise thee. Then shall the earth yield her increase, and God, even our own God, shall bless us. God shall bless us, and all the ends of the earth shall fear him. This afternoon, as you take time on the Holy Sabbath day to commune with God and his nature, let me urge you to go outside and walk around. Look upon the leaves, both on the tree and on the ground. Think of the messages the Lord has given to you. Think of the hope and the activities to come that he has endowed for us to do. Think, as Ellen White said, of God's love and his handiwork. Those who judge of God from his handiwork and not from the superstitions of great men see his presence in everything. They behold his smile in the glad sunshine and his loving care for man in the rich fields of autumn. Even the adornments of the earth, the grass of living green, the lovely flowers of every hue, the lofty and varied flowers of the forest, the dancing brook, the noble river, the placid lake, testify to the tender fatherly care of God and to his desire to make his children happy. Let us remember to behold his smile in the glad sunshine and his loving care for man in the rich fields of autumn. Thank you. Have a good Sabbath.
I want to thank each participant on the program this morning. Juan Portelas and Manuel Ortiz were going to conduct the song service, which did not transpire as planned. And Manuel Ortiz offered the opening prayer, and of course John Schumacher gave our special feature. Sabbath school is dismissed. Thank you.